Hey friend, Chris Vandeviver here from WhyLogicProRules.com on behalf of Cordial Cables. And this month, I want to dig into an issue that I think just about all of us can identify with if you create or record music on a computer. And that is the issue of system overloads. It's amazing how much our computers and our DAWs can do for us. We can make all sorts of amazing music and edit and time stretch and pitch correct and do all this crazy stuff. But as our projects grow, as we're recording and adding instruments and plugins and routing, our projects can grow in size and scope to a point that our computers simply can't handle everything we're throwing at them. And at a certain point, you might hit a threshold with your computer. When you try to hit play or record, you hear, a moment of audio and then everything stops dead in its tracks and an error message pops up and it says system overload. The computer can't keep up with everything you're doing. And from that point on, your computer just seems to be limping along, barely able to handle everything in your projects. So today I want to share with you 10 tips that you can use right now to improve your experience with your DAW on your computer and avoid these system overload issues. Now, I have a project here from a couple years ago. It's huge. It's got tons of plugins and tracks and all sorts of stuff going on. I want to see if I could push this into a system overload situation. Let's take a quick listen and see what happens. Amazing. We're like half a second in and we get the system overload. This is the issue that we're talking about. Let's dig into those 10 tips that you can use right now. Number 1 on our list is close all the other apps on your computer. It's really enticing to leave your web browser open. It's really enticing to leave other audio software open and just, let it all hang out. The problem is all of these apps are taking up system resources that your DAW needs to be able to process everything in your projects. You can take a look on a Mac at the activity monitor to see what's going on in terms of the CPU, in terms of the memory. And we can see right out of the gate that I have Logic Pro taking up a lot of resources. We have complete control. Even the activity monitor is in the mix. And this really proves that there's so much going on your computer. Like this XLN Cloud Sync, I don't even have this app open and it's taking up system resources. And we can scroll through the task launcher and I have Safari open, which is a web browser, Complete Control, which is another app for audio, my screen recording software. If we go up to the taskbar, I have many apps running in the background. All of these apps should be closed down. It really will make a tremendous improvement in terms of performance. Number 2 on our list is restart your computer. I know that seems like such a basic, such an IT solution, like did you turn it off and turn it back on? But restarting your computer does a lot. First, it shuts down all those tasks that were running in the background. It prioritizes the startup disk over everything else. It flushes your RAM and stops any memory leaks from apps that didn't close down properly or, just stuff that's hanging out in the background that you're not even aware of. By restarting your computer, you get a new fresh start. And if you open your audio software from that fresh restart, it will probably perform a bit better. Number 3 is use smaller sample rates for your projects. Every audio project in every DAW has a specific sample rate that it's running at. If we go right up here in the display in Logic, we have many different options from 44.1K to 192K. And what sample rate is the resolution at which the audio is captured. So at 44.1K, Logic is capturing 44,100 samples or snapshots of the audio per second. At 192K, 192,000 samples or snapshots taken every second. An easier way to understand this is just to take a look at 2 images of 2 separate audio at 2 separate sample rates. Here I have a bass waveform at 92K. And then the second image is at 44.1K. It looks a little choppier than the first image at 96K. And that's because the sample rate is cut in half. And so the reproduction of that audio from an analog signal to ones and zeros is, half the resolution. So I wouldn't hold it against you if you thought to yourself, well, I should be working at a higher sample rate so that my audio is more accurately reproduced. But the problem with higher sample rates, if we take a look at the actual audio files, the 96K audio file has a size of 5.2 megabytes. And this is only for, 18 seconds worth of audio. While the 44.1K audio file is half the size at 2.5 megabytes. Meaning that the project at 96K is going to be twice the size of the 44.1. And in turn, your computer is going to have to use more resources, more processing power to run that 96K session. All this to say that the higher sample rates are going to result in more problems in your sessions, not less, even if it is a slightly higher resolution. Number 4 is to adjust the buffer size, range, or any other details of your digital audio workstation. We go to Logic Pro, go down to Preferences and Audio. Right here, we have the I/O buffer size, and we have various numbers to choose from 32 samples to 1024. The buffer size is your DAW's way of telling your computer how to prioritize its processes. The smaller the sample size, the more of a priority it should be, which is great when you're recording audio because you'll experience less latency. But the drawback is you're more likely to experience system overloads. While the larger the buffer size, the more latency you'll experience, but the less of a priority your DAW is to your computer, which opens up its resources and makes it less likely for you to run into a system overload. For recording, I use about 128 samples for my I/O buffer size, and I use 1024, the largest size I can, when I'm mixing or just listening back to my projects. Some DAWs offer many other options for managing the buffer. For example, Logic has 3 different options for process buffer range, which goes hand in hand with the buffer size. We have small, medium, or large. Small is better for recording situations, and larger is better for listening back and mixing situations. So I should actually set the buffer size to 1024 for this session, and also set the process buffer range to large. And Logic also offers the option for multi-threading, which allows you to prioritize either for playback and live tracks, meaning you're recording into your projects, and playback tracks, which is just listening back or mixing. So I would pick playback tracks, I would pick large from the process buffer range, and also pick a 1024 I/O buffer size. And this will make tremendous differences in my session. Number 5, this could vary depending on your DAW, but in the case of Logic, it's always a good idea to not select software instrument tracks when you're just listening or mixing. And what I mean by that is, if we go to the bottom of my session here, I have a software instrument track with Logic Synth Alchemy. And one of the benefits of the modern DAW is that your DAW most likely is always listening and anticipating you recording into it. For example, Logic has a capture recording function where if I decide to play something into this synth, and I'm just going to play a bunch of random notes, and then if I go up to this capture record button, even though we're not recording, even though we're not even listening back, Logic will capture that performance. Check it out. We'll click capture record, and right down here, take a look, there's our performance, which means Logic is anticipating incoming information. And it even has a function similar for audio tracks. So by having the software instrument selected, Logic is waiting and anticipating for any sort of information. So it's actually better in this case with this large project just to create an audio track that has no input and no output. And what this track basically is a dummy track. It has no regions in the timeline, it has no plugins, no instruments, no processing, no input, no output. So as I'm listening back to my project, if I select this dummy track, there's less likelihood I'll run into a system overload. Number 6 is to use send effects whenever possible. Send effects are when you send your audio to a parallel processor. So if we just take a look at the drums here, solo them, I'll play them, and we can see here that we're sending the drums from bus 38 to a reverb. If we take a listen, we can hear some of that reverb. Sound effects are really helpful when you want to process multiple tracks with the same type of effect. Usually it's reverb, delay, parallel compression. For example, on my vocal tracks, if we collapse everything, you can see that a lot of these are being sent to the same exact reverbs and delays, like bus 42, bus 40. You can see that I have a hall reverb, I have a slap delay, an eighth note delay. And by sending these groups of vocals, if we open up the main vocals, there are many vocal tracks. If we open up the backing vocals, we have quite a bit. And sending all of these tracks to the same reverb, the same delay, allows us to add reverb and delay to many tracks without having to open up a reverb or a delay on every single track, which reduces the amount of processing required in your projects. Number 7 is to freeze your tracks. Many DAWs these days have an option called freeze, and freeze basically creates a temporary bounce or a temporary printed track for your DAW to refer to instead of the live active track in your session. For example, I have this clap track here that I can edit if I so choose. I can open up the plugins and adapt them. But this all takes processing power from your computer to keep these tracks active. And when you have things like software instruments, things can get really crazy. With freeze, we freeze the track, which means we cannot edit the track at all. We can see here the current track is frozen. Do you want to unfreeze it? So I wasn't able to change the length of it. I can't open the instrument. Again, we're in an instance that's frozen. I can't open the plugins. In Logic, we have both pre-fader freeze mode and also source-only freeze mode. In source-only freeze mode, we're only freezing the region itself. Input instrument, can't open the instrument, but we can open the plugins and affect those if we so choose. So it's a helpful compromise when you're not committed to a sound quite yet, but you need to unload some of the processing that your DAW requires of your computer. Number 8 is to bounce or print your tracks with the effects just burned into a new audio file, which allows you to power down all of the processing. So let's select a bass track here. We'll select this one. And I have quite a few effects on this particular bass track. Now check it out. If I bounce this track in place, and every DAW has its own language for this, but in Logic, it's called bounce. If we go to File, we go down to Bounce, and we bounce these regions in place, we can allow the effects to be burned into a new audio file. And if I just hit OK, now we have this new audio file with our effects burned in. Let's take a listen to what this sounded like before. And after. Great, so we have those effects burned into this track, which means that we can power down everything on the track. We can mute the track, and now it's not taking up as much system resources. This is definitely a case that you have to be ready and comfortable with committing to a sound, but you can always go back if you need to. And now with this track, I could just hide it from the view, and I know it's in the background somewhere if I need it. But yet again, we've unloaded some of the processing from our session. Number 9 is to save your projects on an external hard drive. When you run your sessions off of the same hard drive that runs your operating system and all your other apps, this can be a lot for your computer to manage. So if you buy a separate external hard drive and run your projects off of the external hard drive, you open up a ton of resources for your computer. Now it can better juggle and manage the project on that separate hard drive and everything else that it needs to do on its own internal system. The minimum hard drive I recommend is 7200 RPM spinning hard drive, which means 7200 revolutions per minute. It's just how fast the disk spins inside the hard drive. I have several spinning hard drives that I use. Better yet, using an external solid-state drive can provide you tremendous value because solid-state drives have no moving parts, which means they're incredibly fast for things like audio production. And number 10 is to upgrade your computer's memory. The memory or RAM on your computer is kind of like your computer's waiting room. Just think of like a doctor's office. Many of the processes of your computer temporarily go into your RAM like a doctor's waiting room and wait to be processed by your computer. It allows your computer some time to kind of work through everything it needs to work through. By upgrading the memory in your computer, you can definitely make an improvement in terms of your DAW's performance on your computer and run into less system overloads as a result. Just a quick note for Mac users, since the future of Apple is based on Apple silicon chips, upgrading the RAM on your Mac is not going to be available to you after you've bought your computer. Instead, you'll have to decide how much memory you'll need at the time that you buy your Mac. So I hope that was helpful for you. Once again, I'm Chris Vandeviver from WhyLogicProRules.com on behalf of Cordial Cables.